Riya Kapoor was hired to kill Arjun Mehra, a wealthy Indian businessman, but as she watched him from the shadows, something unexpected happened. She fell in love, and that forbidden choice would cost her everything, including her life. Riya Kapoor moved through the crowded streets of Mumbai with a precision that made her almost invisible, blending into the chaos while her mind was entirely focused on the new assignment that had just arrived. She had always been a professional, someone who treated her targets as numbers on a list, their lives insignificant compared to the mission. But this contract was different in its simplicity and its secrecy. A wealthy Indian businessman named Arjun Mehra was to be eliminated, and the client's instructions were clear: no mistakes, no witnesses, and no questions. The payment was more than Riya had ever received for a single job, and yet, as she studied the dossier in the dim light of her small apartment, a strange curiosity began to creep into her thoughts. Arjun's life appeared ordinary on paper, almost mundane, yet something in the way the photos captured him hinted at a different story. He was often shown smiling gently at children, walking through busy streets without an entourage, and there was a warmth in his eyes that Riya hadn't seen in the countless faces she had followed over the years. She began to trace his routines meticulously, noting the quiet streets he preferred, the small cafe where he lingered over chai, and the way he seemed to pause to help anyone in need, no matter how insignificant. The more she observed, the more conflicted she became, an unfamiliar feeling tugging at her heart that she had long buried beneath layers of steel and strategy. This mission, which had seemed straightforward, suddenly carried a weight Riya had never anticipated, and for the first time in her life, she wondered whether completing it might cost her more than money. It might cost her very sense of who she was. Riya shadowed Arjun for weeks, moving silently through the crowded streets and quiet alleyways, always careful to remain unseen, yet the more she observed him, the more she noticed details that unsettled her trained mind. Arjun's life was not what she had expected from a man of wealth and influence. He did not flaunt his money or live in a world of luxury disconnected from reality. Instead, he walked with purpose, often stopping to help a struggling vendor, giving directions to lost tourists, or assisting a child who had dropped their books. He cared for his younger sister, taking her to school, ensuring she had everything she needed, and even helping elderly neighbors with small tasks that others overlooked. There was an authenticity in his behavior that made him seem almost untouchable, as if he belonged to a different world than the one Riya operated in, a world of contracts, danger, and death. Watching him, Riya felt a strange sense of admiration, mixed with something she could not name. She noticed the way he laughed at small jokes, how he treated strangers with respect, and how he carried the weight of his responsibilities without arrogance or anger. Every act of kindness she witnessed felt like a silent accusation against her own life, her choices, and the countless lives she had ended without hesitation. Doubt began to creep into her thoughts, subtle at first, then growing steadily, like a shadow stretching over her heart. The assignment, once so simple and mechanical, now carried a complexity she had never faced before. Riya realized that Arjun was more than a target. He was a man who, unknowingly, had begun to challenge the very core of her existence, forcing her to question whether she could complete the mission without destroying something inside herself that she had long thought dead. Days turned into weeks, and Riya found herself increasingly entangled in a web of emotions she had long believed were impossible for her to feel. The more she observed Arjun, the more she realized that he was not just kind, but deeply principled, someone who lived his life with integrity despite the dangers surrounding him in a world full of greed and corruption. She noticed the small, almost invisible gestures, how he would quietly slip money into the hand of a street beggar, how he paused to ensure a stray dog had water, or how he patiently taught his sister lessons she struggled to understand. These moments, seemingly insignificant to anyone else, pierced through the armor Riya had built around her heart, stirring feelings of empathy and fascination. She began to question the very nature of her mission. The thought of harming him was no longer mechanical or distant, it was personal, unbearable even to consider. Every step she took in planning his demise now felt heavy with moral weight, and her mind, trained to suppress doubt, wavered under the strange new reality of attachment. Riya found herself imagining what life could be like if she abandoned the assignment entirely, if she allowed herself to step out of the shadows and live a normal existence. But the underworld she belonged to did not forgive hesitation, and every moment she lingered on these thoughts brought danger closer. Still, she could not stop herself from watching him, from feeling the growing connection that she tried so desperately to deny. What had begun as a simple job had transformed into a tormenting conflict, a battle between her cold professional instincts and the warmth of a human connection she had never experienced before, leaving her caught in a dangerous limbo where love and duty collided in ways she could never have anticipated. One rainy evening, the world seemed to shift beneath Riya's carefully controlled life when she accidentally crossed paths with Arjun during a street mugging. The moment had been meant to be silent observation, yet fate intervened, forcing her to act. Without thinking, she lunged at the assailant, her training precise and deadly, and saved Arjun from harm. In that instant, her cover was blown, but instead of fear or suspicion, Arjun looked at her with gratitude, a gentle curiosity in his eyes that made Riya's pulse quicken in ways she hadn't felt in years. The encounter left her shaken, not because she had been discovered, but because she realized that she no longer wanted to complete the assignment. For the first time, the life she had been trained to destroy seemed worth protecting, and the man she had once viewed as a target became something profoundly human to her. In the days that followed, Riya found herself noticing his presence in ways she could not ignore, the way he paused to smile at a stranger, the careful attention he gave to even the smallest details of his life, and the quiet strength he carried without arrogance. Her feelings, once carefully suppressed, now grew harder to contain, a dangerous vulnerability that threatened to unravel everything she had built. Every time she observed him, the conflict inside her deepened, her heart longed to connect, yet she knew that any closeness could put both of them at risk. The assignment, which had once seemed like a simple contract, had now transformed into a moral and emotional battlefield, leaving Riya trapped between the life she knew as a killer and the irresistible pull of something she had never allowed herself to feel, an attachment so intense that it could change everything, or destroy her entirely. As the days passed, Riya found herself drawn to Arjun in ways she could no longer ignore, and what had begun as distant observation evolved into a quiet, unspoken connection that neither of them fully understood. She began orchestrating coincidental encounters, finding excuses to be near him without revealing her true purpose, and each meeting left her heart pounding with feelings she had long buried beneath layers of steel and discipline. She watched him laugh at small jokes, noticed the kindness in the way he treated strangers, and felt a warmth in his presence that made her question everything about her own life. For the first time, Riya felt the sting of vulnerability, realizing that the heart she had protected through years of ruthless work could be claimed by another human being. But with love came fear, for she knew that the underworld she belonged to would never forgive hesitation or disobedience. Her employer would see any sign of doubt as betrayal, and yet she could not bring herself to harm the man she had come to care for. Every day became a delicate balance of hiding her feelings, planning her next steps, and protecting herself from both the shadows that followed her and the emotions that threatened to consume her. Riya began to imagine a life where she could walk beside Arjun openly, free from the weight of contracts and killings, but such thoughts seemed impossibly distant. Still, in his presence, she felt something she had never known: hope. Love had crept into her life uninvited, and with it came the impossible choice: follow through with the assignment, fulfilling a duty that had defined her existence, or defy everything she had trained for and risk losing not just her mission, but her life, and perhaps even the man she had come to love in the quietest, most forbidden corners of her heart. Riya's hesitation did not go unnoticed, and soon the shadows of her own world began closing in on her. Her employer, a ruthless figure who tolerated no mistakes or delays, had learned of her growing attachment to Arjun, and they viewed it as a dangerous betrayal that could ruin their operation. Rumors of her divided loyalty spread through the underworld like wildfire, reaching the ears of those who had once considered her untouchable. Fear and doubt gnawed at Riya, but she could not suppress the feelings that had taken root in her heart. Every step she took, every plan she made to keep Arjun safe, now carried a deadly risk. She found herself constantly glancing over her shoulder, aware that any misstep could mean her life. At the same time, her mind wrestled with the impossibility of continuing the mission. How could she harm someone whose humanity and warmth had so completely captivated her? The dichotomy between duty and desire became unbearable, each moment spent near Arjun a mixture of joy and terror. She began to notice subtle signs that her employer was watching her, sending unseen messages through anonymous contacts and minor threats meant to remind her of the consequences of failure. Yet the more danger she faced, the more determined she became to protect the man she loved, even if it meant risking everything she had ever known. The underworld's rules were clear: emotions were weaknesses, and weakness was punishable by death. Riya now stood at a crossroads, knowing that her every decision carried irreversible consequences, and that love, once a forbidden spark in the darkness of her life, might very well be the force that led her into a trap from which there could be no escape. Riya knew that the only way to find peace, even momentarily, was to tell Arjun the truth, to reveal the deadly secret she had carried for weeks, but the decision terrified her more than anything she had faced in her career. Every night she imagined how he would react, whether he would recoil in fear or understand the impossible position she had been placed in. She planned her confession carefully, thinking of the safest way to approach him without raising suspicion or endangering him further. Her mind was a battlefield of love, guilt, and fear as she prepared to step out of the shadows and confront the life-altering truth. But while she wrestled with her own emotions, her employer was already moving, orchestrating a plan to eliminate the threat that Riya herself had become. They could not afford hesitation, and the slightest misstep on her part would be fatal. Every message, every shadowy figure she passed, reminded her that danger was closing in faster than she could anticipate. Despite the fear, Riya could not ignore the pull of her heart. She longed to see Arjun, to tell him everything, and perhaps, for a fleeting moment, to imagine a future where they were free from contracts, danger, and death. As she stepped into the dimly lit street that led to him, her pulse raced with adrenaline and anticipation, unaware that each step brought her closer to the trap that had been silently set. Love, which had become her guiding force, was now entwined with peril in a deadly dance. She had chosen honesty, yet in doing so, she walked directly into a situation where the lines between protector and victim blurred, and the cost of her affection might be more than she could ever survive. As Riya hurried through the rain-slicked streets toward Arjun, a gnawing sense of unease settled deep in her chest. Something felt wrong, an instinct honed by years in the underworld, telling her that she was no longer just moving toward him but also toward a deadly trap. Shadows seemed to cling to her every step, figures lurking in corners where no one should be, and the familiar comfort of invisibility she once relied upon was gone. Her mind raced with scenarios, each more terrifying than the last, and she realized that her employer had anticipated her move, turning her desire for honesty into a vulnerability they could exploit. The streetlights flickered overhead as if warning her, and every sound, the distant rumble of tires, the echo of footsteps behind her, made her heart pound faster. She tried to focus on the goal, reaching Arjun and warning him, perhaps even saving them both from the consequences of her earlier choices, but fear clawed at her resolve. The love she had allowed herself to feel now became a source of weakness, yet also a source of courage, pushing her forward even when the rational part of her mind screamed to run, to hide, to survive. Every corner she turned heightened her awareness. She felt eyes on her from unseen places, tension coiling in her stomach like a living thing. In that tense, fragile moment, Riya understood that the world she had created around her, a world where she controlled everything, where every life was a calculation, was collapsing. Her path to Arjun was no longer a simple confession but a perilous journey, a high-stakes gamble where each step could be her last. Love had guided her, but now it had made her a target, and survival seemed as uncertain as the rain-soaked street stretching endlessly ahead. Riya's worst fears materialized in a blur of violence as she reached a narrow alley near Arjun's apartment, where the ambush she had sensed finally unfolded. Figures emerged from the shadows with deadly precision, and despite her instincts and years of training, she found herself overwhelmed. The rain-slicked ground made every movement treacherous, each step a potential mistake that could cost her life. She fought with everything she had, striking, dodging, and using the environment to her advantage, but the numbers were against her, and the realization hit with terrifying clarity: this was not just an attack on her, but a carefully orchestrated plan to eliminate any obstacle to her employer's will. Her heart pounded not with fear for herself, but for Arjun, who had no idea of the danger looming so close to him. She tried to move toward him, to warn him, to protect him even at the cost of her own survival, but every second was a struggle against forces she could not control. Her breaths came in ragged bursts, and the cold rain mixed with the sharp sting of pain from blows she could not avoid. In those final moments, Riya's thoughts were not of escape, but of love, the impossible, forbidden attachment that had driven her to defy orders and embrace vulnerability. Even as the world around her descended into chaos, she clung to the hope that her actions, her sacrifice, might give Arjun a chance to live, a chance to continue a life she had no longer been permitted to share. And then, with one last desperate act of courage, she faced the inevitable, knowing that her story would not end in fear or hatred, but in the memory of a woman who had chosen love over duty, and had paid the ultimate price for it. Arjun would later learn the devastating truth, piecing together the fragments of a story that seemed impossible to believe, that the woman who had saved him, risked everything for him, and touched his life so profoundly, had been sent to kill him. Riya Kapoor's life had ended in the rain-soaked alley, her body a silent testament to the impossible choice she had made, yet her actions had ensured his survival. The revelation left him shattered, unable to reconcile the woman he had come to care for with the deadly world she had belonged to. Her sacrifice became a haunting presence in his life, a reminder of the fragility of trust and the depth of courage that had defined her final moments. Friends and acquaintances spoke in whispers about the woman who had defied the shadows, choosing love over duty, a choice that ultimately cost her everything. In the underworld, her name became legend, whispered with a mix of awe and fear, a professional killer who had betrayed orders for the sake of her heart. Arjun, carrying the weight of both grief and gratitude, vowed to honor her memory in every act of kindness he performed, understanding that the world she had protected with her final breaths could still carry the light she had fought to preserve. Riya's story, tragic yet profoundly human, became a lesson in the power of compassion and the cost of forbidden love, proving that even in the darkest corners of life, the heart could still choose what is right over what is easy. Her life had ended too soon, but the legacy she left behind, of courage, love, and selfless sacrifice, would never be forgotten, echoing in the hearts of those she had touched, and reminding the world that sometimes, the greatest acts of heroism are not those celebrated publicly, but those performed quietly, with love at their core.